As we entered the hospital, I looked around and saw several families with young kids in the waiting area. A few of them glanced my way, and the light caught their eyes, revealing irises tainted a crimson hue. They glowed red like old photos that hadn't developed quite right. There were so many children experiencing the same symptoms as my daughter Rachel, and yet I hadn't seen anything on the local news. Still, word was beginning to spread around town that there was a contagion going around, only amongst the children, at least for now. The triage nurse looked us up and down, scribbling something on a piece of paper. I handed her the necessary identification, including my Proteon company ID badge, then took a step back and waited for her questions. Symptoms? Red eyes, poorly timed laughter, odd statements. No suspicious cravings? I gulped down a dry lump in my throat, thinking about what my daughter had said that morning at the breakfast table. Nope, I lied. The nurse gave me a hard, cold stare for a few moments, then scribbled something and continued her questions. And how long has this been going on for? Just today. The red eye started about 20 minutes ago. That's why I brought her in here. Okay. Have her put on this wristband. Wait over there to be called in. Don't touch anything. It shouldn't be long. My daughter snapped the band onto her wrist, and it made an electronic chiming sound. 2 green lights lit up on either side, next to the Proteon company logo, the mega corporation which ran the high-tech corporate town where we lived. When I first took the job in Pleasant Hills, I thought it was an idyllic, perfect place to raise a family. When the recruiter told me about the salary and benefits, I nearly jumped for joy. But now I was starting to understand that this quaint little town was not entirely perfect. There was something spreading amongst the population. Something unlike anything I'd seen or heard of before. The 2 of us sat down in the waiting room, and my daughter began to eye the toys and books in the corner. Without asking, she stood up and wandered over to the table piled high with reading material. Rachel, I called out, but she didn't stop. A woman sitting near the book stood up quickly and moved away, as if someone with leprosy were approaching. I felt a pang of anger, but realized I couldn't blame her. None of us knew what we were dealing with yet. I was more than a little afraid, too. Rachel picked up a colorful kid's book and began to look through the pages, scanning the print quickly with her red eyes darting back and forth. She seemed to realize the woman next to her was staring, and turned her head to glare at her. Then she made a loud hissing noise, like a territorial street cat. She snapped her teeth and lunged at the woman, and I jumped up and pulled her back. Rachel, no, what are you doing? She went back to looking at the book as the woman ran out of the waiting room, screaming. She's got it too. I looked over to see a man with his daughter and son. The 3 of them were dressed as if coming from church, but there was something wrong with his kids' expressions. Something unsettling. They were staring at me with wide, vacant grins. Their eyes were glazed over, and their teeth looked too sharp, as if being drawn out by some invisible force, being stretched and sharpened into fangs. The changes were subtle but noticeable. Yes, just today I began to see the changes. Lord help us. How long have your children... Winters? Rachel? A woman's voice called from the door to the ER, interrupting our conversation. Winters! Rachel! I stood up quickly and grabbed her hand. She brought the book with her. I'm sorry, she grabbed it before I could stop her, I said to the nurse, gesturing at the book. The woman looked unconcerned. Keep it. She was wearing a respirator mask, gloves, goggles, and a bright blue full-body protective suit as she let us into a room. A sign on the door read, Negative Pressure Room. Should I be wearing a mask? I asked her as she left. Probably, but you'd be exposed by now anyway. The doctor will be with you shortly. Exposed to what? I yelled. The door sealed shut with a hiss and a bang. The woman stood outside for a few moments, taking off her suit, but made no effort to communicate with us or answer my question. A huge window at the front of the room allowed us to see into the ER, and we watched as she disappeared into the crowd of nurses, doctors, and patients. The two of us were left alone in eerie silence. Rachel opened up the book again and sat down cross-legged on the floor. The parent part of me wanted to tell her to get off the ground, since who knew what had happened in there. But she looked so innocent for those few moments I couldn't bring myself to do it. She looked like herself again. Like a normal kid. Except for those red eyes, glowing as she glanced up at me. The PA came on suddenly. A woman's frantic voice began to speak. Code Crimson in effect. Code Crimson in effect. All security personnel to the emergency waiting room now. The message repeated again 2 more times, then the speaker cut out again. What's a Code Crimson, Daddy? Rachel asked, looking up from her book. Is it a fire? I don't think so, honey. I think it means something different. Just keep reading your story. A shrill scream came from outside the room, and I looked out through the large window into the ER. For a few seconds, there was nothing. My heart pounded dully in my ears, and I could feel it in my throat as I gulped down a dry lump. A woman in pale green scrubs raced past, blood shooting from a fresh wound on her arm, spraying the wall red as she ran by. She was screaming and looking over her shoulder, sprinting like her life depended on it. Gunfire could be heard from down the hall, in the waiting area where we had just been. Get down, I yelled at Rachel, running over to her. Someone's shooting. I ran over to my daughter and pulled her behind a chair which was up against the wall. The two of us hid behind it, and I heard people running past outside, but was too afraid to look. The gunfire was constant now, and getting closer. I could hear things breaking outside the room from stray bullets, and just hoped one wouldn't find its way into us. Daddy, I'm hungry, Rachel said quietly. Not now, honey, please. How could she be thinking of food at a time like this? I wondered to myself. More gunshots rang out, sounding very close now. I ventured a glance out from behind the chair we were using as cover. Through the glass, I saw men in black body armor with machine guns in their hands. They were firing rapidly and backing up, moving away from the waiting area. Security Enforcement Officer was written on each of their uniforms, with the company name Proteon beneath that. I recoiled in surprise as something leapt through the air like a wild animal, tackling one of the security guards and sending him flying backwards, his gun firing as he fell. His repeated screams were heard muffled through the door a few seconds later. It was the children with red eyes. Dozens of them from the waiting room were now rampaging throughout the ER, chasing nurses and doctors, running around on all fours like animals. A few people were on the ground, and the children appeared to be feeding on them, ripping out their throats and feasting on their bloody flesh. The power suddenly shut off with a dull click, and the ER was cast into total darkness for several long moments. I'm so hungry, Daddy, Rachel said from behind me, moving closer. The emergency lighting switched on suddenly, and everything was cast in a dim glow from above. I spun around to see my daughter moving towards me, a hungry look in her eyes. She was smiling like a starving piranha, and I could see her teeth growing insidiously longer, drawing into needle-sharp points. What are you doing, Rachel? Stop! Don't get any closer! I felt as if I shouldn't let her know how scared I was. If she could sense my fear, I worried she would lunge at me like a wild animal. Something slammed into the glass behind me, and I spun around to see a teenage boy smashing his forehead repeatedly against the window, his eyes a blazing, burning red. The glass began to spiderweb and slowly crack from its center, and I heard it crunching and breaking from each impact as he bashed his skull against the window again and again. I was so caught up in the sight of that, I nearly missed the reflection of my daughter lunging at me from behind. But I saw it at the last second, and dove out of the way, surprised at my own quick instincts. The glass shattered as she crashed into it and went flying through, landing hard against the boy on the other side. Something was wrong with them. Something very, very wrong. And my fight-or-flight instinct suddenly took over. More specifically, my flight instinct. I leapt through the shattered window, broken glass piercing my palms, and began to run back towards the waiting room. When I looked over my shoulder, I saw my daughter and the teenage boy were scrambling to their feet, racing towards me on all fours like jungle cats, their eyes blazing red. The horrifying sight of them chasing me distracted me from my route, and I found myself slipping in fresh blood, sliding and wrenching my back as I fell down in the middle of a sticky red puddle. I hit the ground hard and bit my tongue, tasting coppery blood a second later. "Stay down," someone screamed from behind them and began to fire. Thankfully, I saw they weren't shooting bullets. Small syringes of green fluid impacted nearby, missing them. But a few found their targets, and the two of them turned around, racing back towards their attacker. Their movements weren't even slowed by the heavy dose of tranquilizer. The man screamed as the two of them took him down, tearing off his black body armor and feeding on his flesh a second later. He screamed in pain and yelled at me to run. After a moment's hesitation, I began to sprint back towards the entrance where we'd come in. A pair of sliding steel doors separated the waiting area from the ER. I raced towards them and began to hammer my fists against them, screaming to be let out. Looking up to my left, I saw a security camera pointed at me. "I haven't been bit," I screamed, thinking for some reason that might be important. Maybe I'd just seen one too many zombie movies. "Please, let me out." Maybe that was the right thing to say, since the doors opened and I burst through them a second later. Two security guards in heavy armor were on the other side. They were closing the door as I looked back through and saw my daughter racing towards us, blood smeared around her mouth like strawberry jam. Then the steel doors slammed shut. "My daughter's in there," I screamed. "We gotta help her." Something impacted the steel door on the other side, deforming the metal and bending into the shape of a child's skull. "It's us you should be worried about," the security guard said. I looked around and saw the hospital was being sealed. Thick steel shutters were closing slowly and blocking out the sun, casting the waiting room into semi-darkness. "Code Crimson lockdown protocols in effect," a robotic voice said from overhead. "Shelter in place and do not approach the infected. Do not attempt to reason with the infected or to speak with them. Do not make eye contact. Assistance is on the way. Do not panic." Another loud bang came from the steel door separating the waiting room from the ER, and I saw a gap was forming. A gap big enough to see through. An eye peered through, looking familiar, except for the color of it. Crimson, like a sunset. "Peekaboo, Daddy," my daughter said, giggling. "I see you." Tonight's story was previously featured on the Dr. Nosleep podcast. A variation of it was written by me, and you can find it on his channel. Check the description below for a link to that. Tonight's story is also expanded in a Hollow's End story, which I'll link at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen at the very end. So if you want to read more about this sort of situation and a story very similar to this taking place in Hollow's End, it's an hour-and-a-half long story, I believe. You can just check out the link at the very end on the bottom right-hand corner. Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. Today's video was supported by patrons like Mark from Earth, Crimson Muse, Joy Burton, Diane Showers, Mark Zawal, Cheryl James, Pick Your Sticker, Teddy Dog, Clue 404, Mamakato, Dante Kincaid, Zarin Ray, Angela Donovan, Blarian50, Devin Kyle, Timothy Baird, Ajeti, Bert Turner, Bajani Espinal, Michael Pierce, Big Joe, Gary Harkonnen, LaDonna Spivey, Scott Tanaka, Tom Stewart, Sherman Davis, Bryce Shelton, Susan McClendon, Elise Batiste, Lisa and the Cult Jam, Open Circuit, Fabulavore, Raymond Jaggers, That Darn Fox, Raison Detra, Kai Gaming 99, Wendy Burns, The Wendigo, Michael Squishy Park, The Gemstar, Vault 77 Citizen, Puppy Dan, Clovis Wolf, Elder Jelm, Derek Prey, Elder Being, KC Hawaii, Rob T, Tragic Mermaid, Darren Fishnauler, Cloves Anoya Harris, Ro Underwood, Florida Man Luke, Bethany's Mom, Winter's Kiss, Sam Brook, The White Stag, Corgi Connection, No Name Marta Cara, Professor Elm, Kathy Barrickman, Cybard Sands, Steve Hennessy, Melanie Sanders, The Archivist, Rob Smith, Term 4, Naz Razio, J. David Wellman Jr., Parker Lewis, Monica Moya, D-Master 311, Britt the Alchemist, Taylor the Fox, Holly Howarth, Julia McWilliam, Lilypad, Serena and Jesse, Diego Rodriguez, Oziel Perez, Wolfcat128, Kamisha Coffin, Jen Scott, Avanza, Lucian Haran Aylan, Hunter Nystrom, and Tyson Harris. If you'd like to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/Jordan Group Horror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content, as well as a Discord channel. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you, which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. It really does help out a lot. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.